Okay, greetings, people. We have to look at this chapter, which is digestibility of feeds. I will not spend your time. I will try to explain in a brief way. When we look at this chapter, there are a few things that I want you and me to check, which are the exam guidelines or the aims of this lesson. The first thing that I want you to do, you must define the digestibility, and we must also define digestibility coefficients. We will check that when we start defining. But when we look at digestibility, we say this is the portion of the feed that was ingested by the animal, digested by the animal, absorbed by the animal, and used by the animal, not excreted by the animal. So we will look at it later. Then we will look at digestibility coefficient, which is the one that we use to measure the digestibility. When we move on, we must also look at the factors that will influence the digestibility of feeds. And when we look at the factors that influence the digestibility of feed, what is important that I want you to focus more on there? We must also look at how does each factor impact on digestibility. You must check whether does it increase digestibility or does it decrease digestibility. We will check that one. Then we must look at ways of increasing digestibility of the feed. If you want your animal to have easy digestion or high digestibility, what can we do? We will look at those different methods. Then the important part, we must also look at the way of calculating digestibility. We will check all the steps of how do we do it. But your sunrise will try to explain almost everything. But as for me here, I will explain the way I will explain. Let's look at the definitions, people. We start with the digestibility. We say digestibility is the portion of the feed that is ingested, digested, absorbed, and used by the animal. So when you look at digestibility, we say this is the part of the feed, the portion of the feed, which was ingested by the animal or eaten by the animal. And the animal also digested the feed, absorbed the feed, and used it, and used the feed. So it's whether it used it for maintenance, for growth, or for production. But this is the feed that will be used by the animal. Now, we have to ask ourselves, how do I calculate its digestibility? What do I do if I want to calculate its digestibility? It now takes us to coefficient digestibility, which we say it is a measure of the digestibility of feed. So we use the digestibility coefficient to measure digestibility of a feed. And this coefficient digestibility, it is expressed in what? In percentage. So now you know the units for coefficient digestibility are percents. So now we have covered three things: the definition of digestibility, coefficient digestibility, which is a measure of digestibility, and the units that we use for coefficient digestibility, which are percentages. Let's quickly look at how can we calculate the coefficient digestibility or the digestibility coefficient. We have this formula in front of us. The formula is saying DC, which stands for digestibility coefficients. DC is equal to dry material intake, and the dry material intake is in kg, minus dry mass manure, again in kg, divide by dry material intake, kg again. Then at the end, you multiply all of this by what? By 100. So look at the formula and take it down. Look at the formula and take it down. You say the dry material, the feed that you take, which is dry, the menu that you remove, which is dry, divide by the dry material intake. Let's look at how can we use this formulae to calculate the coefficient digestibility. We have this first example, my people. With this first example, it says a cow has an intake of 15 kg. It has an intake of 15 kg hay with a moisture content of 10%. When you read the statement, you read the first part. It's whether there will be a full stop there, or there will be a comma, or there will be and. So when we read this one, the first part, most of the time, the first part ibe intake, intake, the last part outtake, but it's not always the case. Let's look at this one. A cow has an intake of 15 kg hay with a moisture content of 10%. Idle ukudla ukuthi akube u15 kg, kodwa kulo kudla lokho kune moisture ewu10%. Thina kufuna sibheke ukuthi i-dry material ezoba khona lapha izoba nganani. Sizobheka ukuthi how do we get that. Then they say the cow excretes 8 kg of manure with a moisture content of 50%. Let us look at how can we get this one. They say step 1. Change the feed and manure values to dry values by calculation. We know that in our formula, we must have dry matter intake, dry mass manure. That's what we must have in our formula. There is nothing that will talk about moisture. So how do we do it, my people? How do we do it? If you look here, we have the intake which is 15 kg. And kule intake is nani? Sine moisture which is 10 kg. We will start with the intake now. Let's check the intake. What is happening here is that sifuna ukuthola thina ukuthi lo 10% lo wenza how many kgs kulo 15 kg. Sometimes they will say convert the 10% to kgs. But mina ngiye ngibeke kalula ngithi asithole ukuthi lo 10% wenza how many percent kulo 15 kg. And remember, this 10%, it is the moisture content. But what we want at the end of the day that we will take into our formula is the dry matter content. Let's check. How do we get it? When we want to get the 10% of the 15 kg, it's simple. I want you to say 10 divided by 100 multiply by 15. When you say 10 divided by 100 multiply by 15, when you punch your calculator, it will give you 1.5 kg. This 1.5 kg, it is the moisture. But remember, in your formula, you need what? A dry material intake. So what does this mean, my people? It means we must remove the moisture. We must remove the moisture from the total intake, which is 15 kg. Now you're asking yourself a question. How do I remove the moisture? It's simple. You will say the total intake minus the moisture in kg. What is our total intake here? The total intake, let's try to use another one that will be vivid. The total intake is 15 minus 1.5. If we say the total intake is 15 minus 1.5, what do we get? You punch your calculator, you will get 13.5. This 13.5 now, it is our dry material intake. So we'll take the dry material intake into our formula and substitute it there. I hope you get me, people. We will take the dry material intake and substitute there, which is 13.5. Siyithole kanjani? Siqale sabheka ukuthi lo 10% oyi-moisture mase uconvector sewuyisa kuma kgs alo 15 usinika okunganani. So sathi 10 divided by 100 multiply by 15. So besifuna ukuthola ukuthi u10% ka 15 kg unganani? Sathi 1.5. Sayisithi asiwudinge lo 1.5. We must now remove the moisture from the total intake. Sisale nobani thina nale dry material. Sakwenza kanjani lokho? Sathi 15 kg minus 1.5 sasala nobani no 13 kg. Now we are covered with a substitution yakuphi yaku dry material intake in two ways. Let's now look at the moisture. I hope my space will be enough here. Let's look at the menu, which is the outtake. Izothi ayibe simple. Button menu. Remember bathi dry mass menu. What are they saying in this statement? The cow excretes 8 kg of menu with a moisture content of 50%. In the formula, we want the dry menu, not the moisture. So what you do here, you do almost the same way that we did in the intake. What you do here, you say, we want to convert the 50% into half of the 8 kg. So sifuna ukuthola ukuthi u50% ama kgs anganani amangaphi kulo 8 kg. It's simple. Sikwenza kanjani lokho? We will say the 50 divide by what? 100 multiply by what? By 8. You punch your calculator, you get your answer. It will give you what? It will give you 4 kg. This 4 kg is not the dry material. It is the moisture. We must then remove the moisture from the total outtake. How do we remove the moisture from the total outtake? We must say the total outtake minus the moisture. So we will say 8 minus 4. What do we get? We get what? We get 4 kg. So now we have the dry material intake and the dry mass menu. The dry material intake that we have now, it's what? It's 13.5 kg. The dry mass menu that we have, it's what? It's 4 kg. Let us check, people. What do we do next? You now take these figures that you have. You take them to your formula. Remember, ithini formula yethu sihlobo sami? Ithi formula yethu dry material intake. I-dry material intake yethu bani? U13.5 minus dry mass menu. I-dry mass menu yethu bani? U4 kg. Divide by dry material intake. Never forget that we must multiply by what? By 100. Let us check how we can do that. Now we have, let's say we assume that we have our formula. Our formula, we say it says dry material intake. Itini dry material intake yet 13.5 minus, here we have kg, minus mass menu, dry mass menu 4 kg, divide by the dry material intake 13.5 kg, multiply by what? 100. Yona lezo sinika ukuthi bese by percent. I used to say to my learners, start by solving what is here at the top. Start by solving what is here at the top. CT 13.5 minus 4 kg. You will get 9.5. Then you say the 9.5 divide by 13.5 multiply by what? 100. So you say now the 9.5 divide by 13.5 multiply by what? By the 100. Never forget the 100. It will give you 70.37, which we can then maybe agree that, let's just say it's 74%. That's how simple it is. So I would like you to start by solving at what is here at the top. Ubhale answer yakho, phinde futhi ubuyisele, divide by 13.5 bese multiply 100, and then again you punch your calculator. Ungafuni ukuyiphanja yonke at once, maybe it will give you an incorrect answer. That's how simple it is. Let us check how we're supposed to do it before we move on. So what we have here, we said you change the values. We said here, we say 10% divide by 100 multiply by 15, yes, nikubani 1.5. Sabuya sathi now manje sesino 1.5. Siwenza njani manje u1.5? Let us then get the dry by saying 15 kg minus 1.5 sathola ubani u13.5. This 13.5 iwona lesiwuthethisana ukuphi ku calculator ku formula yethu. Then sabuya sadira nge outtake now. Sat in our outtake the menu sathi sithi 50% divide by 100 multiply by 8 yasathola ubani u4. Kulo 4 sasithi let us now remove the 4 sithole ubani i-dry menu. Sakwenza lokho sathola ubani u4. Now we have two figures that we take to the formula, 13.5 and 4 kg. Let's check what we have. We now have the formula here. So what we do here, you now substitute. Dry material intake, sithi sifaka ini dry material intake u13.5. We also have minus 4 kg multiply by 100. Never forget to multiply 100. Divide by 13.5. What do we get? We get 70.4. But remember, ngicela uqale ngokuthi 13.5 minus 4 uzothola 9.5, because some calculations azothola kuphazamisa. Okay, fine. Let us assume now, my people, that we have this 70.4. If we have this 70.4, what does this tell us? Remember, I said we must know how to calculate, and we must also know our implications or interpretation. How can we interpret this one? When you look at this 70.4, what does it say to us, my people? It simply means that the animal or the cow was able to digest and absorb 70.4%, and the remaining 29.6% was not digested and it was excreted. So you can put this in maybe three ways. The animal was able to digest and absorb 70.4% and excreted 29.6% done. So in a simpler way, when the answer it could be any answer, but you will say the animal was able to digest and absorb. You give us the figure, which is 70.4 in this case, and excreted, so 100 minus the answer that you got base. So that's how simple it is for you to get it. But you will see how we analyze it examples. Let's look at this one. Another, they will ask you, Guti, categorize the feed, whether it's a roughage or a concentrate. We're still going to talk about roughages and concentrates. But what you do here, we say if the feed, if the digestibility, it has a coefficient digestibility that is more than 60, it means the feed is a concentrate. But if the coefficient digestibility is less than 60, it means the feed is roughage. So now, let's look at the answer that we got. The answer that we got here, we said it's 70.4. So it means it's more than 6, thank it. So we said if it is more than 60, we can give it a name and say it's what? We will categorize it under what? Under concentrates. So let's check what they said here. We say concentrate. Why? Because the coefficient digestibility is more than 60. Simple, 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 simple as that. That's what I wanted you to understand for now. Let's also have another example, but we'll use another video. Let's have another example.